Jacqueline Kennedy carried a surname built entirely on cattle dirt. Her grandfather despised that translation enough to systematically rewrite history. Late Latin gives us the word Bovarius, meaning ox, which eventually mutated into the Old French occupational title for a cowherd. You expect American royalty to descend from actual kings, or at least from ancient European wealth. They actually descended from men who shoved livestock through the mud. Major John Verneau, Bouvier Jr., could not stomach the smell of the barn lingering on his legacy. He possessed a sprawling 12-acre East Hampton estate called La Sata, purchased in 1925 and fully owned by 1935 after securing a massive $1.3 million inheritance. Columbia University presidents drank at his table, while judges walked his impeccably cut Italian boxwood gardens. Young Jackie rode ponies across the manicured summer grass, learning the precise posture of a dynasty. Calling the estate La Sata, meaning place of peace when it was his first quiet contradiction. Peace does not require constant, exhausting performance. The Major played the role of Lord of the Manor summer after summer through the 1940s, enforcing a rigid perfection that felt more like defensive armor than actual leisure. He worked harder to hold the scene together than any physical laborer in his lineage. Wealth arriving in precise numbers rarely cures the terrifying hunger for older, aristocratic validation. You can easily measure land, but you cannot quantify the agonizing gap between immense new money and desperately desired old blood. A massive fortune purchased the estate, but pure cash cannot buy an ancestry. Bloodlines require unshakable proof. He simply manufactured it out of thin air. In 1940, the Major published a rare photocopied 96-page vanity genealogy titled Our Forebears. He erased the peasant roots entirely, surgically removing the cattle from the family tree. A completely fabricated ancient house of Fontaine near Grenoble suddenly appeared on the printed page. Specificity remains the liar's greatest weapon against suspicion. He decorated the lie with heraldic arms, the official shields traditionally granted to genuine nobles, featuring a brilliant silver background, black bells, and a fierce red lion. Knights serving under King Louis XIV were suddenly inserted into the family bloodline. Parliamentary secretaries and revolutionary heroes materialized exactly where ordinary workers used to stand. The surname itself fought the forgery every single time someone spoke it aloud. In pre-revolutionary France, titles meant land, while occupational surnames brutally marked the people trapped in the economy of necessity. Bouvier announced function rather than leisure. It translated to a man handling cattle, driving oxen, or surviving purely through bodily effort. Elite families in Europe flaunted particle names like D to deliberately distance themselves from the mud of the working class. Major Bouvier tried to force an aristocratic crown onto a word that literally pointed back to the barn. Fabrication is simply social anxiety suffocating informal dress. The harder he pushed toward Grenoble, the louder the oxen answered from below. The ink dried, and the forgery instantly became the official record. Relatives eagerly accepted the velvet costume. Children grew up inside the grand illusion, adopting manners perfectly suited for the descendants of French nobility. Time hardened the fiction into an atmosphere they breathed without ever questioning the source. The genuine story carried far more raw, undeniable power. Michel Bouvier did not lounge in a luxurious chateau. He fought as a terrified foot soldier under Napoleon Bonaparte. Defeat at Waterloo forced him to flee across the Atlantic Ocean. He arrived in Philadelphia in 1815 carrying nothing but the calloused skills of a cabinet maker. Michael's arrival was definitely not a romantic grand tour of the colonies. It was desperate movement immediately following total collapse. He landed in a foreign city and built a fortune piece by agonizing peace. Wood, sawdust, clients, and relentless sales defined his days. Elite power brokers soon noticed the immigrant's brutal precision. Joseph Bonaparte actually commissioned his furniture. Stephen Girard bought his custom pieces. The craftsman parlayed those elite connections into massive firewood sales, then pushed aggressively into the real estate market. Scale changes the entire trajectory of a bloodline. A modest timber business violently mutated into the acquisition of nearly 800,000 acres of coal-rich land. By 1840, those underground resources generated over $50,000 in royalties every single year. That staggering income shifted the family into the ruling class permanently, severing them from poverty forever. The sons of the cabinet maker did not inherit sawdust or desperation. They inherited lethal capital and boundless ambition. They weaponized the massive coal royalties to aggressively breach Wall Street. They executed trades, leveraged property, and turned Philadelphia timber grit into New York financial dominance. Skill transformed into cash. Cash mutated into position, and position eventually bred deep, paralyzing insecurity. A half-century later, the Major looked at this monumental American rise and felt profoundly humiliated. In circles where old breeding could effortlessly outrank new achievement, an artisan founder felt dangerously close to the factory floor. The Gilded Age demanded ancient roots. The Bouvier sons possessed the heavy cash to enter the room, but they lacked the ancestral ghosts required to sit comfortably at the head of the table. An immigrant building an empire with his bare hands utterly lacked the imported gloss of a European duke. He targeted the maternal branch next, hunting for anything that could be polished into royalty. Michel's second wife, Louise Clifford Vernew, was born in Philadelphia in 1811. She married the wealthy cabinet maker in 1828, merging two striving lines. Her father, John Vernew, integrated into the United States in the early 1800s as a perfectly plain French immigrant. He carried absolutely no titles. No aristocratic due preceded his surname on his official naturalization records. He presented himself to the new country without a noble particle, a heraldic shield, or a breathless claim to greatness in Poitou. He was simply a man arriving, a man signing, a man becoming American. That unadorned signature carries more raw human life than any borrowed coat of arms could ever hold. The Major looked at that ordinary signature and aggressively painted gold over it. Our forebears suddenly declared the Vernews were one of the most illustrious families of Poitou. A practical merger of immigrant households was violently dressed in ancient prestige. For 29 long years, the myth went entirely unchallenged. Jackie ascended to the White House carrying the ghost of Grenoble Knights firmly embedded in her public image. The press deeply loved the French aristocratic sheen. The public consumed the fairy tale eagerly. Then a younger cousin touched the live wire. John H. Davis possessed the ultimate weapon against family mythology, insider access. He was the Major's direct grandson. He shared blood with Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, Lee Radziwill, and Edith Little Edie Beale. Outsiders can always be dismissed as jealous critics trying to wound the clan. A first cousin, once removed dropping a bomb from inside the house, destroys the foundation instantly. Cousins know exactly where the family legend is guarded most carefully. They hear the stories whispered softly at holidays and recognize the sudden silence when certain dangerous names drop. In 1969, Davis published The Bouvier, Portrait of an American Family. The title sounded exactly like a warm, respectful tribute. Readers opened the cover expecting soft nostalgia and flattering portraits. Midway through the text, Davis initiated an absolute slaughter of the family legacy. He ripped the thick velvet off the ancestors without hesitation. He exposed the red lion and the black bells as pure fiction. He revealed Michel Bouvier as the desperate Napoleonic soldier and the sawdust-covered laborer. He proved definitively that the ancient House of Fontaine never existed in their bloodline. The book sold a massive 166,000 hardcovers to a hungry public. People bought the book to touch glamour, but they eagerly stayed to watch a dynasty bleed. Davis did not stop at digging up the distant dead. He dragged the vulnerable living into the glaring light. He detailed the severe alcoholism of Jackie's beloved father, Black Jack Bouvier. Detonating a fake knighthood shocks the social system, but exposing a living parent's severe alcoholism shatters the fragile emotional arrangements holding the survivors together. Jackie Kennedy Onassis did not just read the damning pages. She watched her father's darkest weakness become public merchandise. The penalty for exposing family truth is always permanent exile. Jackie severed ties with her cousin completely and forever. Blood loyalty demanded absolute silence, and Davis had screamed into a megaphone. He traded kinship for 166,000 readers. The family name took a brutal public hit, transforming instantly from inherited royalty to exposed social climbers desperately hiding their past. You assume a highly public execution of a lie forces everyone to abandon it immediately. You radically underestimate human desperation. Little Edie Beale fiercely refused to let the crest fall. By the 1970s, documentary cameras found her living in utter squalor inside a decaying East Hampton mansion ironically called Grey Gardens. Raccoons literally lived in the rotting walls. Trash covered the hardwood floors. Yet she proudly held up faded copies of the fabricated heraldry for the lens. "We are of the kings of France," she declared relentlessly, over and over again. The less the physical environment supported the story, the more forcefully little Edie had to scream it into existence. Belief does not follow documented proof. Belief follows sheer psychological need. Repetition became her only evidence. She weaponized the fake lineage to survive the agonizing decay surrounding her. Removing the anchor of French royalty would violently destabilize everything attached to it, leaving her with absolutely nothing but ruin. She did not lack the factual information. Davis's explosive book was public knowledge. She chose the lie because the lie provided the only structure keeping her from total mental collapse. The Major built a shield in 1940. He aimed to block out the paralyzing shame of ordinary labor. 30 years later, his granddaughter used that exact same shield to defend against madness. The documentary caught the exact moment a genealogical lie calcified entirely into psychological armor. She viciously called Davis a traitor to blood ties. Rejecting the myth meant betraying the grandfather who carefully handed it to her. It meant admitting the peeling paint around her was all she actually had left. The lie transformed from a shallow tool of social climbing into a profound mechanism of psychological love. You stand entirely between two competing versions of your own history, one polished to a high shine, one brutally plain. We eagerly inherit stories that make ordinary days feel connected to something grand, something worth passing on at the dinner table without hesitation. You trust the leather cover and the thick paper because a grandfather's absolute certainty feels infinitely stronger than doubt. Then, a younger cousin checks a specific date, notices a glaring missing birth record, and the tiny crack widens much faster than comfort can keep up. If the shining nights were copied, what exactly were you celebrating all those years? The sudden loss disrupts the core story you told yourself when no one was listening. It fundamentally changes how you interpret your own struggles. Struggle feels incredibly noble when you believe it is merely a temporary fall from greatness, rather than the bare ground your family has always stood on. When the illusion finally dissolves, every single toast feels heavier. Trust begins to shift beneath your feet, and you suddenly realize you were given a highly curated version of survival. Why does honest work feel so much less worthy than empty titles? The Major deliberately turned a sawdust shop into a castle moat out of desperate protection. He handed his descendants something to stand on when the blunt truth of labor felt too heavy for elite society to accept. Michel Bouvier left a massive legacy, physically written in 800,000 acres of coal. His calloused hands shaped wood for billionaires. His courage carried him across a terrifying ocean immediately after a global empire fell. That is a magnificent American arc existing completely without a single invented duke. Yet his grandson firmly believed it simply wasn't enough. Spectacular success felt entirely unfinished until it was wrapped in ancient aristocratic paper. The rarest 96-page vanity book in America committed the quietest crime possible against memory. It stripped the raw dignity from exactly where the family truly began. Every heirloom tells truth until it quietly rewrites you into a total stranger. What borrowed kings are hiding the real builders in your past?